We're well into Bad Game Summer 2025, and today's game is something that I distinctly remember from my childhood. I loved He-Man. I loved the cartoon, I had a ton of the action figures, and for as long as I can remember, I always wanted a He-Man video game because it's an awesome world with great, unique characters, and every 80s franchise I think could be made into a fantastic video game in the right hands, just as long as those hands aren't Kevin Smith's. He-Man, Defender of Grayskull, doesn't have a great reputation online, so being the masochist that I am, I decided to give it a try and see for myself how it was, and I have some mixed feelings. This is a hard game for me to roast for a couple reasons. One, that I and so many others have had such fond childhood memories of He-Man that it's tough to belligerently crap all over it like I tend to do in these videos. And two, that honestly, this is not a great game, but it's also without a doubt the best game of Bad Game Summer 2025 that I've played. The developers knew what they were making, a straightforward action game with a beloved IP, and unlike everything made these days, they didn't try to make it into something it wasn't. Now, does it stick the landing? Not totally, and there are problems, so let's get into it and see what they are. Defender of Grayskull takes place in the early 2000s He-Man cartoon universe. For context, I've only watched the 80s version, but my understanding is that this one was pretty great too. As far as I can tell, the look of this is certainly faithful to the original. The cutscenes were fun and they had that Saturday morning cartoon feeling to them. The story goes that Skeletor lures He-Man to Snake Mountain, and while he's distracted, Skeletor leads an all-out assault on Castle Grayskull. The sorceress has to use all of Grayskull's power to protect it, which also means sapping He-Man of his strength and turning him back into Prince Adam and getting him locked up in a jail cell. Thanks a lot, sorceress. So then, in a decidedly confusing move, she gives him enough of her power to turn back into He-Man so that he can break out of jail, and then he's on a quest to get back to Grayskull and stop Skeletor before he takes all of Grayskull's power for himself. One would think that maybe she should have just let him keep his power to begin with, but maybe I don't know the intricacies of Grayskull power infrastructure or something. The game is split up over just a few levels and takes maybe 3 or 4 hours at most to beat. You'll spend around half of it as He-Man on foot, and then the other half of the game is on his faithful buddy Battlecat. The cast here is pretty sparse, and that was really disappointing because the only characters that you're going to see are He-Man, the Sorceress, Triclops, Beastman, Skeletor, Battlecat, and Panther. No Man-at-Arms, no Teela, no evil-lyn, no Merman, no Trapjaw, and certainly none of the rest of the cast. My ideal He-Man would take 8 to 10 hours, and everybody would be in it in some way, preferably as unlockable playable characters, so the lack of characters here is really noticeable, which I'm sure is because it was a lower budget game. But even with a lower budget, you can tell that they made a real effort with what they had, and I, a total nobody on the internet, applaud them for that. That's about the best part of it though, because while this is an easy game to play through, what made it more difficult is that it's got some jank to it. And you know what? Turns out He-Man doesn't really fare all that well against jank. This game has a pretty good amount of platforming in addition to the combat. I learned the hard way in the first level that He-Man, while being a powerful warrior, is very fragile, and while he won't die in one hit or anything like that, he can't fall very far before dying, and as with Altered Beast, a game I just reviewed this summer, your health will get drained really quickly during combat without knowing it while you're fighting enemies. To help with this, you have 2 bars, one for health and one for his, he-power? Manpower? Testosterone? Anyway, you can hit the directional pad to drain one to fill the other. Do you want more power to use his really unimpressive special attacks? You're going to need to sacrifice some health to do it if there are no power-ups around. Or, if you're like me and you sucked at the combat, you spent most of the game with no ball power because you are constantly trying to keep your health topped off. The special attacks, as I mentioned, weren't really fun to watch and didn't appear to hurt enemies very much either, despite some of the enemies being weak to them. You'll know when you do it because some extra sparklies will float around He-Man, then he starts to do his move, and then the camera will do the bullet time matrix thing and go 360 degrees around him until he finishes it. It was a very stylish way of showing off something that just wasn't interesting to look at. It's like if this morning my wife spun the camera around me while I cleaned up the cat barf that was on the floor. My problems with the combat are one part game related and one part user error because, if we're being totally honest, I'm kind of a moron. I spent the first couple levels trying to play this like it was much faster paced, like Devil May Cry or something similar. A hack and slash, if you will. And while that strategy works when you're in the first level fighting functionally retarded robots, the enemies will eventually get a little bit smarter and start blocking and shooting and spamming a basic attack, so that it's difficult to get a hit in. This is where you'll actually have to learn to block, wait for them to finish trying to smack you, and then you get to smack them right back. As far as weapons go, you get access to your trusty Sword of Grayskull, your shield, and your battle axe, each with their own special attacks, and each weapon also works more effectively against certain enemies. I skipped a lot of that after a while because I realized I'd live longer if I just spammed the basic attack combo with the sword to prevent my enemies from getting a hit in. And this worked on bosses as well. As someone who formerly played as a rogue in World of Warcraft way back in the days of Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King, I always go for the stun lock if possible. The Battlecat levels were definitely harder, mainly just because of how Battlecat controls. It's comparable to platforming with a horse, like you aren't just jumping, but you're making him leap forward this great distance, and you're going to have to get a feel for the distance and height he jumps, and until you do, you're going to leap to your death a lot. Now, I'm not even kidding, like you will go flying off of ledges without thinking about it if you're not careful. In a pretty metal move, Battlecat is also stocked with a supply of freaking rockets of all things to fire at enemies, though you're going to need a pretty straight line of sight for them to make contact, and even then it's not a guarantee whether they are going to hit their target. Sometimes they just fly around in a circle and do nothing. Melee combat while mounted is terrible because He-Man's sword is almost useless, so you're stuck taking swipes with Battlecat's paws. I tried hitting enemies with He-Man's sword head-on and also from the sides to see if that would help, and neither seemed to really do much of anything, and I ended up taking damage more often than I actually hit something. In addition to the sometimes stupid combat, I also spent a lot of time in this game lost. There are some spots where you'd enter a level and it'd give you this really long overlay with the camera of where you're supposed to go, but when everything kind of looks the same, it's still a little easy to get turned around. In the first level, I spent around 15 to 20 minutes looking for a key to a door, only to find out that it was in a box that I needed to destroy. Maybe that's intuitive to some people, but after the first couple boxes that I hit on my own, I didn't see anything stored in any of these boxes, so I stopped hitting them, and that was precisely where they put the key at. There are also points where the only way to get forward is to kill all the enemies in the area. You'll get blocked by a green force field, and then you have to kill all the enemies, and then the force field disappears, and then you keep going. Every once in a while, I would lose track of like that one final enemy and have to backtrack a little bit to go find him, and then I kill him, and then it would unlock and open up for me. There was also an area in a Battlecat level where it doesn't look like there's a way to move forward until I saw online that you have to fire rockets at the side of this pit or cliff or valley to knock down some rocks and cross. If you used up all of your rockets, then you're screwed and you have to kill yourself. Hopefully you have enough lives to do that, or else you're starting over completely, or at least from the checkpoint. There's a lot of things in this that'll make you wonder how you were ever supposed to figure any of this out without some dumb luck, or in my case, checking a guide. The last level had a lot of this as well, which made the final stretch leading up to Skeletor really frustrating. Like, things can be just out of the way of your vision that you won't see them to know to interact with them. Speaking of Skeletor, the boss fights in this were really disappointing, as when you actually get to fight these guys, they all go down really quickly. They basically just stood there while I hit them. And again, there's only Triclops and Beastman before you get to Skeletor himself, and you fight him twice, once on Panther and then once on foot. He's the only one who puts up a real fight, and that's because he's got a bunch of trash enemies helping him out as you're trying to beat him. Otherwise, we just kind of traded hits like I did with the other guys, and I happened to kill him first. So despite all the jank, He-Man Defender of Grayskull is still the best of the bunch this summer. I know this is one of my nicer reviews I've done, especially lately, but I expected this game to be a lot worse than it ended up being, and I kind of consider it a palate cleanser with all of the stuff that I've played and also with all the stuff that's coming. Speaking of, I've got another game coming next week, so make sure to subscribe to see what it is. Thanks for watching.